Peace be upon you. We're at a very critical turning point in the U.S.-China relationship, and the trade war is turning into a suicidal war. I'm emphasizing the word suicidal. If there aren't any solutions between President Xi Jinping and President Donald Trump, we're heading toward the worst economic phase of our time. Today's episode will shed in-depth light on the U.S.-China relationship and what impact it has on inflation, products, and the world as a whole. We start, of course, and President Donald Trump makes a decision first to impose customs duties on Canada and Mexico 25%. Solutions were found for this agreement on February 3rd, and of course the agreement was that Mexico did not impose customs duties on it. He spoke with it and worked and implemented an agreement that was agreed upon in 21 and was activated. Canada added taxes, which has now become a crisis in the crisis of relations between America and Canada. Of course, Canada responded with taxes, and of course, an agreement was activated that President Trudeau spoke about on December 24, 18, and its activation, we can say, was all a retreat from President Trump or a play, but we are waiting to give them a 3-month grace period. We discussed the events. Talks were expected in China due to 10% tariffs. China supplies 30% of global goods. Tariffs cause inflation. Optimism followed Mexico and Canada solutions, expecting a Xi-Trump call. But the issue remains, activating 10% tariffs on Chinese imports. Let's see the impact on prices. 10% tariffs affect $525 billion in exports. Who pays? Likely not Chinese companies, as they depend on. When you come to impose Republican taxes on it, you are sure that there is inflation. There was optimism after there were solutions for Mexico and Canada. Everyone thought that there was a phone call between President Xi Jinping and President Trump that would solve the problem, but what happened? It was not solved, and 10% Republican taxes were activated for products coming from China and entering America. Let us see. How will these customs duties affect America and the upcoming prices for the world? 10% customs duties will affect $525 billion of all exports entering America. Who will pay these taxes? I certainly believe it will not be Chinese companies, because many of these Chinese companies depend on and have strong competition in addition to monopolizing the market. We can say that if we just look at the percentage of the top 10 things that China exports to America: telephones, which are all American products, computers and computer spare parts, which I will talk about. If we look at electrical appliances, toys, sportswear, furniture, clothes, spare parts, they are all products that we are talking about and use in our daily lives. Shoes. All of these will have an additional 10% tax. That means we are talking about approximately 80% of Chinese products will have an additional 10% Republic tax. A study tells you that approximately AP, we are talking about Apple, from spare parts to products manufactured, 78% of Apple products are manufactured in China, so you will put 10% on these. Laptops, approximately 80% of laptops. There are customs duties on it, meaning that 78% of America's consumption of laptops comes from China. This is a very large number. If we also look at furniture, a study tells you that approximately 85% of furniture comes from China. All of this has an additional 10% customs duties. Shoes, we are talking about more than 75% have customs duties that will increase by 10%. This gives you the impression that higher prices are on the way. Who's going to pay these tariffs? Is it China or America? I believe, and God knows best, it will be America, because China will respond firmly. My prediction is that it won't be the companies paying these tariffs, but rather the citizens in America. Of course, one of the things that happened in the same pattern of the story was the activation of the Republican taxes, and at the same time, Secretary of State Marco Rubio was visiting Panama. Everyone knows that President Trump was always saying that if we don't take Panama by force, we will take it by force. We must take over the canal for Panama by force. Of course, Rubio left and they have a problem with the Americans. Why? Because the Panama Canal is an important canal that connects South America and North America, and China uses it extensively. Of course, we remind people just to be fair in the equation. When America comes to enter a certain country, it builds, for example, military headquarters. When China wants to expand into a country, what does it do? It makes investments in infrastructure, like building sensitive things such as ports or railways, getting involved in more commercial matters that can have economic impacts. We don't want to dive into the details, but these are two different strategies. One is military, and the other is economic. When China entered Panama, it made significant and substantial investments, particularly and especially in a port called Cristobal, which is strategically located and backed by a company from Hong Kong. They also made investments in another port called Balboa, which is equally important. These two ports, Cristobal and Balboa, are both managed by a company from Hong Kong. Rubio has a big disagreement with these two Alberts. I mean, severing the contract, but it is very difficult for them to sever the contract because they have a lot of experience in managing Chinese ports, and an American company cannot implement this, nor was it asked to implement this decision until now. I mean, the Panamanian president said I cannot do this thing, but he also asked Rubio to get out of the two countries agreement, Rod Initiative, which is related to infrastructure, building a railway and linking countries through trade. They signed this agreement in 2017. Rubio asked to withdraw, and the Panamanian president, of course, said that he would withdraw from the agreement as well, giving priority to American ships. Of course, Chinese ships. Approximately 22% of the port depends on Chinese ships, and the largest part, which is more than 30%, is for American ships, of course. Rubio's priority was to give preference to American ships and not charge them fees, and the Panamanian president implemented this. We can say that he was forced to take an American side instead of a Chinese one. But let's see what comes next. You always say that when you make a decision to twist someone's arm, there are consequences and future implications. Let's see. These are certainly some decisions before President Xi responds. In the first minute, after the 10% tariffs were applied, President Xi Jinping instructed the government to impose tariffs as well. We can say that he established a 10% tariff on oil, agricultural products, and other related goods. Let's look at the effects of this. If we consider oil. As for crude oil, China only imports about 2% from America, which is roughly 193,000 barrels a day, totaling around 6 million barrels in December. That's a really small number. Like we mentioned, at certain times in June, they were taking about 1 million barrels a day, and look at the drop from that. But I can tell you, crude oil for China has a major alternative, such as Saudi Arabia or Russia. In my opinion, this will not be affected, but it will decrease. I mean, perhaps the agreement will be canceled and they will not buy oil from America at all. Also, from the second things, farmers, from my point of view, have a very big impact. The same scenario happened in 2018 when President Trump applied and implemented customs taxes on China. China responded by imposing customs taxes on agricultural products coming from America. What happened? Companies stopped buying American products. She went to Brazil and he told you that there was a loss, as you can see, that it fell by more than 80%. There was a loss for farmers that reached $20 billion during that period, and agriculture is dangerous. Why? Because agriculture also gives you the impression that if agriculture goes down, it means you cannot plant, you cannot fertilize, the materials and equipment you use are higher. It has become a very big risk that it will go down like this for farmers. It is a very dangerous sector to compete in. From my point of view, if we also look at the decisions that President Xi made, he imposed customs taxes on the English. Regarding LNG and natural gas, it was about 4 million tons a year, which means we can say it's roughly 6% of China's natural gas supply. They imposed a 15% tariff on it. We can say that there are alternatives available because they can get it from Russia, Qatar, or Malaysia. But as you all know, 6% is significant for the Chinese economy. Chinese, I must always clarify an important point when we look at customs duties. Who will pay these customs duties? I believe That the study, as you will see in today's episode, gives you the impression that the one who imposes taxes is always a state that may be affected, especially in a sector that does not have an alternative. If it has an alternative, you can avoid these tariffs. So when China imposes tariffs on American products and doesn't have an alternative, the citizen will end up paying. But if they do have alternatives, like I showed you with oil, or agricultural products from Brazil, or natural gas from Qatar, they can find substitutes. Another thing they did was initiate antitrust actions against Google, and there are ongoing investigations into the company. Just yesterday, Google released its financial statements, and the antitrust actions that China has raised against Google could have an impact. The stock is expected to drop by 9% in after-hours trading, but it might also be due to a decline in their cloud business. Let's see what comes next, but they have initiated antitrust actions against Google. Of course, the plan for the two countries was for trade to go to approximately $400 billion, and President Trump asked for it to rise to $400 billion, but as you can see, it went down. We are talking about $24. Trade has dropped to $140 billion instead of $400 million buying Chinese products from America, a big drop. As you can see, its division is manufacturing goods, and most of it is like cars, like the sector. All of these, from my point of view, have an alternative for them. If we look at agricultural materials, they will almost take a share of more than $20 billion. Oil and energy take a small part, meaning that, as you can see, President Donald Trump does not wait 24 hours to respond to the Chinese decision, and President Xi Jinping's decision, in my opinion, is not a purely commercial decision, but rather a suicidal and extremely dangerous decision that raises the bar very high, and he makes a decision and says to the shipping companies, they stopped accepting products coming from China and Hong Kong. Companies like DHL, UPS, and FedEx, he didn't specifically mention them, but shipping companies have made this decision and halted any shipments from China and Hong Kong. In my opinion, this is a very dangerous decision. You say, what is the decision? I tell you that anyone in the retail sector in America will be affected very greatly. Anyone who buys Chinese products from the retail sector will also be affected. I mean, we are talking because there is a law in America that says that products whose value is less than $800. This doesn't just relate to customs duties. Many citizens, and even small to medium-sized businesses, use these platforms to make a lot of orders under $800, bringing in these products and starting to sell them to consumers in America. So for example, you find a lot of sites like Etsy and Amazon. Most of the 30 parties that buy products from China and sell them to citizens in America, a large percentage come from China. They tell you that 70 to 80% of the products that are sold through 30 parties come from China. This gives you the impression that there is a very great danger for small and medium-sized companies when they stop receiving products. Frankly, it is a very severe decision. A large part of the youth and people who buy cheap clothes rely on these platforms because, as I'll show you now, Shein is considered one of the most important platforms in the beauty and clothing sector and is a leader in America. It's now facing a ban as well. If we look at Temu, which is from Pinduoduo, it's also facing a ban. Alibaba, which owns AliExpress, is also under scrutiny. Just to show you the importance of Chinese platforms, if we look at the most downloaded platforms in 2024, TikTok is number 1, with over 170 million people using TikTok in America, and most of them are young people. And I want to emphasize an important point. The ban hasn't happened yet, but I believe it's coming. Many young people make money through TikTok. They use TikTok as a livelihood for them. They put money into it now. It has entered, and when you ban TikTok, you will affect them greatly in the next stage. Temu is the same. It's the third most downloaded platform in 2024, and they say sales reached over $50 billion this year. Many people buy products from the platform and then resell them to consumers in America. So, you've also entered a very important sector for small and medium-sized businesses. I believe there will be a major disruption in the next 24 hours in America. Because, as you said, it's not just affecting their purchasing. It also raises the prices of alternatives, which are always more expensive than those from China. Even those with small and medium-sized businesses will be significantly impacted by this decision. The important and more dangerous thing is that President Trump is not planning to talk to President Xi Jinping. From my perspective, that's the more concerning part. Or it could be that President Xi Jinping doesn't want to talk to President Trump right now, and both of them are saying, we're not in a hurry to speak with each other. I say they need to hurry up and talk because they are putting the world in a very serious danger. I want to give you a very important study. Smoot-Halloway Act or Turf Act. This was in 1929. There was a law that said they wanted to impose customs duties, and they imposed customs duties on foreign companies in more than 25 countries to protect farmers and companies in America. Of course, there were many studies telling you not to impose these taxes. They were pleading with President Hoover to get out of this decision. Of course, he did not get out of this decision, and the greatest economic collapse occurred. Many people blame customs taxes for the cause of the collapse in 1929. Look, as you can see, it was the tax stage and the tax rate reached 20%. It was a very large number. Now we are talking about 17, and today you have the alternative, meaning China, as we said, is imposing customs duties on them. And American industries are very few in many cards, meaning we can, in a circumstance, meaning 2 or 3 decisions. Many things can fall and we can enter a very difficult economic collapse, so they must speak from my point of view, but in order to talk in a somewhat optimistic way, it is very important, guys, that we follow what is happening. I hope that if you like the content, like, subscribe, and support this content because when we get into this very important talk, YouTube starts, it affects it, so I hope for your support. Other than that, the very important thing is that you see that you have to focus. Cash, so far, my view of it is very dangerous because all of this will add to inflation. Something to reassure people, for example, in the Cooperation Council. My view is that countries that have relations with 2 countries, this is a good thing for people who depend on oil. I think that the situation of public goods is good. I am not telling you to get out of stocks. Stocks are better, from my viewpoint, than cash, even today, because of the very high inflation, and the prices of products and purchasing power will begin to be affected. If this isn't resolved, we need to be cautious, in my opinion. Overall, having a diversified investment strategy across countries is extremely important. I hope you found today's episode helpful, and for those who want to learn more about investment, we have personal courses available. You can find the details in the description. Thank you, and see you next time.